It's the Morning Marketing Machine, here to grow your e-commerce business with proven marketing strategies and tactics, so you can run your business with machine-like precision. My name is Douglas Levin. Let's dive in. So wanted to welcome everyone to Morning Marketing Machine, and I'm very honored today. Actually, the first time I was a guest on someone's podcast, I was a guest on his podcast. So a little bit about JB. JB Brown is the founder and operating partner of Augmentum Holdings. He has been a lead strategic mind for companies like Surgical, CV Therapeutics, and EndoChoice to wide-ranging entrepreneurial pursuits in e-commerce. He's built and sold multiple brands. He's an advisor to many well-known names in the business with topics ranging from marketing, organizational effectiveness, conflict resolution. He pretty much does everything. So thank you so much for coming on the show, JB.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Doug. Absolutely.
I absolutely loved being on your show. I'm so glad I finally got you on mine here. But I wanted to ask you, for people that may not know, if you can let them know how you got started kind of in business world.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my start was a little bit more untraditionally traditional is the best way that I could put it, in that I did start in corporate America, but the way that I sort of came up through those ranks was a little bit unorthodox. And then I started very much on the sales side of the industry when I first started out of college, which at the time was in sort of the financial services and mortgage business. And I ended up getting out of that business and going into healthcare. And that's where I really found the home where I would stay for the duration of my corporate career. And I did. I started on the sales side of that business from selling mostly cardiac medical devices early on in my career. And then I wanted to branch out of sales. I really got to a point where I felt like I had proven everything that there was left to prove. And I'm a very internally competitive person. So it's always about not so much revenue goals. That's just one measuring stick, or income, or any of those things. It's more for me always been about, what else can I do that makes me a little bit uncomfortable? Because if I'm comfortable all the time, then I'm not growing, and if I'm not growing, then I get bored. So started to go into some different aspects of that healthcare industry space. So I ended up doing some really cool, quirky things, kind of unintentionally. Intuitive Surgical, which you mentioned earlier, I ended up being kind of their lead national consultant on just a number of different random projects that they would have with healthcare organizations. So one month I might be working on a first in human procedure with a new robot that they had, and we had to kind of figure out, how does this fit into the overall scope of the organization and what the organization's doing on a big picture level, and then also down to who should be the personnel in the room. Do we need 12 people? Do we need 6? Is 8 too many? Who needs to be credentialed? How do we need to actually perform this procedure so that the patient is safe and we have a good outcome? And then, how do we make it financially feasible for the organization and sort of sand out any rough patches? So I did some similar things I would consider to be sort of high level but arbitrary troubleshooting for organizations like Gilead Sciences. EndoChoice was one of them, and Intuitive. And really, what that turned into was, I always had these jobs, Douglas, that they had a title, but what I actually did had nothing to do with my title. They would just make something up to give me a title, because it was sort of like the joke used to be, JB's a little bit like Rambo. Like, we'll just figure out what we need to get done, and we'll put him behind enemy lines and let him sort of do his thing, and then he'll just show back up one day and tell us how it went. So that's kind of how it started for me. And then as I was doing that, as often happens for a lot of folks who, if you're out there and you have any um, entrepreneurial bent to you, which probably most of the folks listening to this do, if you spent any time in corporate America, you'll be able to relate to this. The same thing that made me attractive and useful in corporate America, which was my ability just innately to think creatively, to look at things in a slightly different way, and to be really laser focused on what's the fastest way to solve this problem. Um, that sounds like something that every corporation in America would desperately want to have someone on their team doing. And they do. However, the same personality traits that allow me or you or some other folks to excel in that area will be grating to people who are corporate, lifetime corporate, because that same personality type also makes it so that it's difficult for you to accept status quo for the sake of it. And in corporate America, that's kind of how the game works. So you end up with this dynamic tension between liking some things about what you do and also deeply disliking some things about working in a kind of a corporate groupthink environment. So um, probably 10 years ago now, I started doing what a lot of folks do, which is like, well, maybe I'll keep doing this corporate job, but I'll start something that's just for me on the side. That's a hybrid. And so I did. I started with, believe it or not, first thing I ever did was I started with franchise. I just went all the way in, and I bought a franchise that was in the consumer electronics space, in the cell phone space, which at the time I didn't know any better. But essentially, what you do when you buy a franchise, if you're not careful, is you buy yourself a job. and, and I already had a job, and so I learned a lot through that process, though, in a couple years long, and I realized what I liked, what I didn't like, what I wanted to do, what I didn't want to do, and then I ended up in this crazy world of e-commerce sales. And I really, again, I went all in. By that time, I had left corporate America full time, and I was doing a combination of Amazon FBA. I was actually doing a good amount of consulting because I had started going to China right away. Like as soon as I got into FBA, I realized, okay, there are too many hands touching every single one of these products, and I need to figure out how to eliminate some of those hands so that I can candidly get a little bit more of that profit in my pocket, and also maybe develop a competitive advantage so that I can see um, how to build relationships with folks that are actually creating these products, and maybe find out about some that no one knows about yet. So started going over to China, learned, bootstrapped, figured that out, started doing podcasting and education, did a lot of coaching for other people at the time, and then at the same time, sort of launching my own brands, and did well, and we're able to unload some of those brands a little bit later, and um, then I from there, and I'm still involved with FBA. I do a lot of coaching with that. Amazon has changed so much in the last even 3 years, but especially longer than that. The name of the game is a little bit different. You really it's it's to me not as easy to just jump in and know nothing and have success as it once was. There's some things you really must know. So I enjoy still coaching folks, but I don't actually sell on Amazon anymore. And that was a strategic decision, because when I started getting into e-commerce as a whole, if FBA and Amazon or merch or whatever you were doing, if that's the gateway drug, then then which I think for a lot of folks it is, if it's the gateway to digital commerce and you really get into it, then the whole world opens up to you when you start learning about selling your own products and building your own website and funnels and copy and direct response. When I learned about direct response and copywriting and what it meant to be an offer owner, my whole world exploded in a great way. So that's kind of where I find myself now. I have a number of brands myself. I have actually a small digital marketing agency where I help local businesses. Um, and I've been an executive coach this whole time. That's really been my core strength. That goes all the way back to my corporate career, is an executive coaching background, sort of consulting hybrid, and just really enjoy learning about different ways to um, bring value to the market, which is really what all of us are doing. So that's a 7-minute snapshot of sort of where I've been and where I'm at now.
Right. And there's definitely a lot to unpack there, so I want to kind of go back on some of that. And
Yeah,
and I started with Amazon FBA as well, so
yeah.
that seems to be the gateway for everyone, it seems. But you brought up uh, the idea. Obviously, you started with franchising. You from there you went to FBA. In your head at that point, when you obviously you weren't your own boss at the
Mhm.
time, but you were coming at it from the perspective that basically I want to. Yes, it's a side hustle, but I want to be my own boss. What what ultimately made your decision up to first start franchising and then go the Amazon FBA route when like what was kind of the impetus to kind of do that, like and I guess some of the struggles that you kind of dealt with along the way, because it's never as easy as everyone says it is, right?
No. So are you talking about what made me go the franchising route initially, and or then what made me leave franchise and go to FBA, or both?
Both, yeah, both. I think both.
So here initially my thought with going into a franchise was what a lot of people I believe think, which was, it seemed on paper and those are two important words, seemed on paper. It seemed like it was a little bit less risky because in your mind, you're thinking, and of course the franchise salespeople are telling you, it's an established business model that, is already proven. And what I couldn't have known at the time is that a lot of the earnings claims that they make were eh, generous at best. So it seemed like it would be wise to follow a proven system and have some guardrails around what you were doing for your first sort of entree into business ownership. Well, and I think in theory, there, in an ideal frictionless world, and I say that a lot, in a frictionless world, there could have been, it could have worked. And I think there are some great franchises out there. Unfortunately, I think there are a lot more franchises that what you find is the costs are fixed, and that's not a good thing. Usually fixed cost is good. So when you get into business and you want to try to really quantify your cost as closely and as accurately as you can. However, with a franchise, whether your unit or units make money or not, that franchisor who owns the rights to all of that, they want their check every single month, no matter what. And they have, depending upon what the nature of it is, you either have a fixed percentage of sales that you need to pay gross. You have a fixed marketing budget often that you're responsible for. In many cases, you also, if it's a physical products type business of any kind, you also have a minimum amount of products that you have to purchase every month, whether or not those products sell or do well. So in some ways, that model can be the worst of both worlds if you really get into it not understanding what the true cost of ownership is going to be. And then you have rent, because it was a physical, store within a store. It was actually that concept was a concept within Walmart. And another small thing, little things that you pick up on that you just wouldn't have thought of before you got into it. If you're selling cell phone accessories and electronics accessories inside of Walmart, well, Walmart's more than happy to rent you that space. But guess what Walmart also is going to want to do? They're going to want to compete directly with you to sell those same things, and they want their rent every month. So really, it just became one of those deals where it was probably $15,000 to $20,000 a month out the door, fixed cost. And that's a big nut when you have a full-time job and you have a full-time staff and trying to manage them and all of that. So I it crashed and burned. The costs in retrospect, I can laugh at it now. It was not funny then, but the costs never would have made that model work, and it didn't. It ended up not working. The way that particular, they're still around today. They're actually a really well-known name, but they've completely changed their business model, and they don't do it that way anymore at all. And it was interesting. So I ended up, that was a 6-figure hit, and it hurt badly. I mean, it hurt badly to go from really having been successful at almost everything I had ever done before to an absolute kick in the teeth, where you wake up and you feel like, oh my gosh, I've just let my family down. My wife and my kids who were counting on me. What did I do? And it gets pretty dark, Douglas. So I gave myself a few weeks consciously to have a pity party, because I knew that I needed to process through what had happened, and I needed to get past blame, because of course, legitimately, there was some blame, some things that they had said that were not true. But I needed to get to the point where I took my own responsibility and said, you know what? You didn't do your due diligence because you didn't even know what questions to ask. And that's your fault. And I never forgot it. I never forgot. And I remember having concerns when I was going through the due diligence process and being afraid to ask a question because I didn't want to sound stupid, because I'm thinking I'm in the big boy world now. If I ask a dumb question, they're going to find me out that I don't know what I'm doing. Well, what I didn't realize was that was actually a perfect way for them to know, like, this is a guy whose pocket we can get into, because I was so afraid of being seen as a fraud or as a pretender that I didn't ask questions that I really should have. And I knew I should have. So if you ever do a business deal with me now, or if you get coached by me, I'm polite about it, but I'm relentless when it comes to asking questions until I really understand something. And so what I learned from that endeavor was that I still wanted to be my own boss, and I still enjoyed business, and I still wanted to do something. It just wasn't franchising, because really you don't even have the freedom of being an entrepreneur when you own a franchise. You essentially have literally bought yourself a job, and more importantly, you've bought yourself a boss, because you have to do everything the way that they tell you to do it, even if it's wrong. It doesn't matter. When you sign that franchise agreement, you're agreeing to do things the way, if, let's say, Subway could be wonderful. I don't know that much about their operating agreement, but you can't go to Subway and then decide, what, we're going to start offering cheeseburgers because our market would prefer to have cheeseburgers. Subway is going to say, subsection 7, article 3 says that you can't sell cheeseburgers. So I wanted to have a lot more control. If I was going to fail, I wanted it to be 100% my fault. and look, after I did that, I tried a few other things, and many of them were failures that were my fault. But I think you would probably agree with this, and everyone who has been through that entrepreneurial journey, you're going to fail. It's a matter of how quickly can you do it, and can you do it in a way that you're sort of doing it forward and learning every time you go. So the Amazon FBA world was great because, candidly, at the time, the barrier to entry was significantly lower than, and I I had depleted my savings at that point, and FBA gave me an opportunity to start a business that I didn't have to spend as much. I still went a little deeper than most people, and that when I started my first series of products on Amazon, between going to China and going to different trade shows and researching and buying test orders, probably all in, but travel and everything else, probably about $13,000-14,000. Not insignificant, but I didn't have to do that. It's just the way that I tend to be a very direct to the source person. I could have done it a lot cheaper had I known a few things, but that was a great place to start because it allowed me to be as successful and as creative as I was willing to take risks for.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot in what you just talked about, specifically in terms of the franchise side, that I really I want to get to as well. But the one thing that you said, which I know I've done on my end, is the idea that you feel like a fraud, you feel like an imposter sometimes, so you don't
Yeah.
want to speak up. I think everyone goes through that. Like obviously I can only speak for myself, but I go through that all the time.
Mhm.
Like it's what we do as business owners, since we're always doing things we've never done before. You always think you're going to be found out or whatever it is. So looking at, I think that was a big takeaway that from what you said that I want to make sure everyone listens to is ask questions. Don't feel like they're going to find you out or something. It's going to help you in the long run. Um,
I tell you, I have come to believe that I have a superpower, and it's not what anybody would think. If you go around and have one of those fun conversations, like, what would your superpower be? Or what is it? Um, I think my real superpower is that I have just, you get kicked in the teeth enough, and candidly, you begin to be, you get very comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's where I'm at now. I'm completely comfortable saying, I don't understand that. Could you explain it a bit differently, or help me understand this? Or, gosh, you know what? I'm really not very good at this particular task in my business. And I could either spend an enormous amount of time and energy becoming good at it, and I probably never will be, or I can find someone who already is and just pay them to do it. And those are the little things that are not so little that you figure out. But if you think of it as a continuum, and this is sort of what I've realized, here's on this one end of this continuum here, you have folks that are extremely overconfident and do not have a lot of skill. Right. And usually the folks that appear to be the most confident are the ones who are the least competent, in my experience. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have folks who are supremely competent, but they're always thinking to themselves, like, gosh, I really don't know enough. I need to always be learning more. I need to surround myself with people who know more. And most of us fall somewhere in the middle. And depending upon the day, we might vacillate back and forth between the two. But I, just in my experience and being so fortunate to work with some really incredibly talented people who are just rock stars. Some of them are well known, many are not. I have yet to meet a single successful person who doesn't feel like they're incompetent and don't know what they're doing and are pretending someday. The folks who always feel and project confidence usually are the ones who are really pretending, and you kind of have to be a little careful.
That's a good point. There's getting back to, obviously you were talking about your franchise experience, and there was something else I wanted to ask you about with that too. Is you referenced the idea that like you had a lot of struggles. Obviously, you had the 9-figure kind of sum ultimately when you dealt with that. Since it sounds like it was like one of the worst points that you kind of had to deal with from like the business perspective. Ultimately, like this is the one thing that I'm always trying to figure out from people that I have on is like, how do you get past that? You talked about obviously like have a little pity party, but mentally, like I know how I am sometimes, and like when those negative thoughts come in, like it can cripple you. And like I've talked before about like I'll curl up in a ball or something when something's happened, like these terrible things. So like what helps you mentally to kind of get over that situation and move forward when you're in that position?
Excellent question. Well, for everyone, I think that the subject matter and the unique situation will be different.
Mhm.
But I do think we all share something in common. Those of us who continue to persevere, I think what it boils down to is having a deeply rooted sense that is outside of yourself, um, that you're accountable to something or someone, and also what really helps enormously is just having some history behind you, so that you can have a benchmark to compare against. So for me, when that happened, and I've had many situations in life, whether it was a business or personal, that were rough situations, and that was certainly up there. But truthfully, when it happened, I do remember being deeply depressed for a few weeks, and what brought me out of it was the same thing that always brings me out of it. You know, at that point in life, I had had a lot of ups and downs. You know, growing up, I grew up in Maine I was a poor kid in a poor town. And so you combine those two things, and, it takes quite a bit just to get out of there, and you have to have some luck, and you have to be willing to kind of move through some less than ideal circumstances. So I was, and I'd been kicked around before. So I had the historical perspective to look back and say, this is not the first time that I've been knocked down or knocked off the horse. It's just that there's more zeros. That's it. Really, I've had situations like this where I've been kicked in the teeth. It's just that right now it feels bigger in my mind because the zeros are different. The other thing that really helped me was, um, as a father and as a husband and as a man, what was the alternative, really? I mean, the alternative for me, I suppose, was, like you said, and this is the instinct, but do I go crawl in a hole and tell everyone to go away and leave me alone? Well, that sounds good in theory, but at the time when you have a 5'2" and brand new born baby, they don't understand and don't care that about daddy's business failings. All they care about is, daddy, can you spend time with me? Can you teach me how to throw a ball? Your wife just wants to make sure that you can help her cook dinner. That's it. And I found joy again in those seemingly minute, mundane is a better word, mundane, unimportant tasks. And what's beautiful now, Douglas, is that I look back, and my perspective has never changed since then. That was a defining moment for me, and that I realized I don't think that much about zeros anymore. I think about value. I think about what are the things that I want to do with my time, because that's the other mistake that I made that I didn't even cover, which was that I didn't buy that business because I had a passion for what it was or cared about it. I bought that business because I thought it would make me money. I don't make decisions for that reason anymore. It's a factor, but it's not the driving factor. So to answer your question directly, it's when you go through something that's really hard, and I coach folks all the time, and it's funny when you're coaching people that are high level people, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're a billionaire. It just means that they're driven to achieve something that is greater than themselves. That's how I define it, and that's how I decide whether or not I'll work with someone. Usually it's a professional issue or a financial issue, but often what surprises you is personal comes into it, because a lot of us as entrepreneurs and folks who run businesses, it's hard to differentiate between our personal lives and business. And so what I always do to benchmark folks is say, listen, what I want you to do is to think about this moment in context of your life, and maybe not to the same degree, but what has happened to you before that was a little bit similar to this, and how did you handle it? And I want you to think back to that time and think about how you got through it. And more importantly, remember that you got through it.
Mhm.
And whether it's business or personal, that's kind of been my mantra is, you can get through, people are resilient, and you can get through a lot. And as dark as it might seem that you just lost a deal, or you lost an entire business, or, lost a spouse and had to go get a divorce, or whatever it is, you can rebuild. You can. As long as you keep falling forward, even if crawling forward, you can rebuild. And so I just, I think I've learned, maybe it's age. I don't know. I turned 40 this past year, and I have noticed a shift in that I'm not as concerned about um, opinions or status or optics or any of that. It's really just about what things can I do that bring value, that make me happy, that I enjoy working on.
Very cool. So obviously you referenced your family, you referenced the coaching. How did you end up transitioning from Amazon FBA? Like, there are a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. First, I guess in terms of this part, um, uh, how did you transition from Amazon and that aspect of it to coaching? And is that the part of the business that you love the most, or is there something else that really drives it for you?
So there's a couple parts. Great question. There's a couple parts to that. One, the reason that I transitioned from FBA, and this is actually fairly recent, I should clarify that I sold my final FBA brand less than 6 months ago, and really what it boiled down to for me was, I'm not saying this, I'm always cautious about this, but I'll be exceptionally transparent. I don't ever want to dissuade somebody from a dream, or from taking a positive step in your life. And Amazon FBA with the right mindset can still be very profitable, and it is. However, I think of things the same way that I think of any potential partnership, any business partnership. Um, I try to think about if there's alignment in world outlook and goals between the two parties. And that doesn't really matter to me whether it's you, Doug, and I trying to think about something that we want to maybe launch together, or if it's Amazon. Amazon is a business partner if you choose to sell on their platform. So is Walmart, so is Shopify, Etsy, you name it. Any of those platforms are, in a way, a business partner. So Amazon has changed significantly in recent years. And in my opinion, they have changed in a way that, unless you have very deep pockets and are extremely sophisticated, or some combination of those two things, there's a lot more risk with that business model than there is with other ways to build an e-commerce brand, because um, they can unilaterally suspend you for no real reason and not even tell you why that they did it. And you and I both know people that that's happened to. I have clients that that's happened to. Amazon has gotten caught in recent months, after denying it for a long time, finally admitting that they were directly competing with private label sellers and using their back end data to launch their own private label products. And I want to say to folks who are thinking about it, think about this for a minute. Would you, if you had a potential business partner who was a human being, and you found out that that business partner had done some of those things, would you ever accept it? Would you tolerate that behavior? You wouldn't. And so for me, it really became a feature of, um, the other component to it was that folks who are exclusively FBA sellers who start that way sometimes get into a false belief, a self-limiting belief, which is that, well, I know how to do Amazon and that's going well, but I could never do the full e-commerce thing and be responsible for all of it. The truth is, once you dig into that, it's not nearly as hard as you think it is. Um, and I learned that, interestingly enough, I had some clients who were FBA clients who had wanted to transition to having their own fulfillment, and most of them were using Shopify. If you were using something else, and they had asked me like, "Hey, would you coach us there?" And at the time, I was like, "Listen, I have not personally sold on those platforms, but what I will do is I will help you with sort of top-down executive level coaching, and we can figure it out together if you're okay with that." And all of them would say, "Yeah, that'd be great." And what was funny is seeing them have success really early on with some of the techniques that we were using actually ended up giving me the confidence to say, "Gosh, this isn't really nearly as hard as I thought it was." And some of the challenges that you run into with Amazon that I just talked about, you don't have when it's your own thing. You don't really have those same challenges. Even little innocent things. For example, I know that you know a whole lot more than I do about messenger bots, and Amazon has taken some strange stances on that in the past, where they almost look negatively upon trying to artificially essentially market, that's the word normal people would use, market your products. They call that review manipulation. So not only when you own your own store on Shopify or whatever, there's dozens of platforms, but when you own your own, not only is that not a black hat tactic, you should be doing those things because that's just good stewardship. So I really felt like I just became bearish on Amazon in general. And look, that may change because I have a suspicion there's going to be a bit of a reckoning for them coming up because they've gone so far in a certain direction that I think is anti-seller and pro, in their mind, pro customer. That's why they're doing it. In their mind, it's pro customer, but it's also very pro Amazon. I think they've overcorrected. And when you overcorrect and you see a big business like that overcorrect, it's predictable. Lawmakers begin to get involved, and that's what we're seeing. We're beginning to see stories come out in the Wall Street Journal and others about what they're doing, and eventually they'll probably swing back in another direction. And so it's still a great opportunity with some very important caveats. But truth be told, for me and my worldview and my skill set, and most of the skill set of the folks I work with, it's really just as easy if you're starting from nothing to build a non-Amazon brand as it is an Amazon brand.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would echo a lot of those points. I think in some ways it is more difficult. I say, like, I think a lot of people will look at Amazon because it's such even today, it's a low barrier to entry and you can have success. A lot of times when you're doing, say, a Shopify store, like I have experience with, you have to understand marketing. Or you have to find somebody who understands marketing. Versus Amazon, it could just be as simple as keyword research. And then, okay, it's a niche that I could probably compete in. There's not a whole ton of competition. I'm going to source a product and, oh, look, I've got sales because I'm spending money on PPC. So they could have results. But I think in general, yeah, I mean, to learn those tools in terms of it, you can have so much more success. And at that point, you're building a business too. You're not just on Amazon's platform where they could do whatever they want to. So yeah, I would definitely echo what you're saying there. For everyone, if you're going to use the Amazon platform, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Like, I still use it, but using it without understanding the downsides and preparing for those downsides can lead to your business's suicide at that point.
It could be very dangerous. And you had a second part of the question I never got to. I'm sorry. You asked about which part of it I enjoyed the most. There's really two things that get me going in the morning and that really drive me. One is I'm just a problem solver. That's really what I am. I'm a PPS, professional problem solver. And what that looks like changes depending upon the day, the moment, the scenario. But I love trying to figure out how to solve creatively unique problems and bring value. That's what gets my creative juices going. The second part of it is I am built to serve. And I've learned that more, and maybe it's become more pronounced just as life has gone on. But in some ways, I would say that if I have a personal win in my business, it's sort of like you have a big personal win and a payday and sort of looking like, oh, that's cool. Awesome. Move on. What am I going to do next? And that's about the level of excitement. But if I have a client who has success, it's like one of your kids. I get so excited seeing them have success. And in some ways it's a force multiple of the amount of excitement that I would have if it were me. And so learning that about myself, that I'm just as much driven by seeing and helping other folks solve their problems and have success, and really so joy is an important thing. Joy is a thing, the whole concept of joy in my life now, that drives a lot of my decisions. If people are familiar with, my wife got me onto this lady who is an organizer by trade, and she has these TV shows. Marie Kondo is her name, and she has this thing when she's trying to get you to declutter your house. The simple question, you make it a binary choice, and you look at something and say, either does this spark joy or does it not spark joy? If it does not spark joy, it has to go. If it sparks joy, it can stay. And I'm sort of using a variation of that for lifestyle design. Does this spark joy or does it not spark joy? And if it doesn't, unless I have no choice, like there's some things like doing your taxes does not spark joy, but you can't just Marie Kondo it out of your life. You still have to do it. There are a lot of things that we do as entrepreneurs that when you really stop and sit down and write down what you like to do, you probably shouldn't be doing. And so I've learned that within certain parameters. I wouldn't want it to be probably my full-time thing. I don't want to be anybody's guru, but I do get a lot of joy out of sort of one-off coaching and consulting, just to help folks have these aha moments. I could see in a different world if if I had it to do all over again and we had a different society where we paid them better, I think I would have enjoyed probably being a teacher. Because those, when you see a student of yours or someone you're working with have this aha moment, it's pretty special.
So would you consider that like your purpose for what you do at this point, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think my purpose in life right now, and it's funny, it's all encompassing. It's not just professional or personal, it's both.
Mhm.
In order, I'm I'm a father and a husband and a friend, and I'm also a businessman. And in those four areas, my goal is to um, try to steward whatever relationships that I'm given, whatever resources that I'm given in the best way that I can to bring value, to try and help lift people up. Also, if necessary, to maybe forgive the football analogy, but to, to grab a face mask sometimes and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" But to truly be a real friend, because being a real friend sometimes, the old saying, a real friend stabs you in the front. and and I think I'm a little bit like that. Folks who have worked with me, because I try never to be unkind, but I'm extremely honest and extremely direct. And I tell clients all the time, whether it's a client that I'm working with, because I have clients that are in many different industries, and I have some that are still very much in corporate America. And I'll always say the same thing, which is, understand that I might be the only person in your life who truly has no ulterior motive or hidden agenda whatsoever other than your best interests. And I'm so committed to that, that I'm willing to be fired by you if it means that I need to choose between telling you the truth or keeping you happy with me. I will always tell you the truth. And it's of course, when you have a personal relationship, you don't give that big speech up front, but I'm the same way. If you're a friend of mine and I see you doing something well, I'm going to be the first person to hug you and be like, "I'm so freaking proud of you." And if I see something that isn't aligned with who I think you are or who you told me you are, I'm going to say something about it. And um, I don't know that, I get joy out of it. More importantly, it's definitely who I was made to be, for sure.
I think it's something that you honestly don't see as much as you should.
Mm,
Whether it's like obviously in the world in general, but specifically in the business world, I think at some point when you start to have any level of success, you basically have people who kiss up to you, or you think you're better than everybody. I won't mention any names of people in
yeah,
the public eye, but
yeah.
you start to think of yourself in in that way, and you can't actually take constructive criticism anymore. I know I always look at it from the perspective of I'd rather be successful and have people tell me the honest truth
Mhm.
than to go down in flames with whatever it is I'm doing just because I wanted someone to agree with me.
I heard a story this week actually about a guy who I did not know. It was a third hand story, but I loved it. So I'll share it here, who was a little bit like that. He'd had some success, and we all have had that to some degree. My eyes were very much opened to, when I reached a certain level in corporate America, people started to treat me differently. I was the same guy, but it became harder and harder to find somebody who would disagree with or challenge me to my face. And I thought that was odd. And initially you don't realize it and you think, "Gosh, I must be doing a great job. Everybody's happy." And you realize, like, no, people begin to think like, "Oh, they put you up on this pedestal." The same thing happened several years later when I had just enough success in my e-commerce endeavors to start giving speeches on some, fairly well-known stages. The same thing. It was a lot of bouquets being thrown. Well, it was a guy that had a similar situation, and he told a story about, he went an entire day and he found this awful joke. It was offensive. It was I don't know what the joke was, but it was an offensive, awful joke. And he was telling people all day this joke. And the guy who was telling me this story was surprised. And he's like, I said, "Well, what surprised you?" And he said, "Well, because he got to me and he told the joke, and I just stared at him and I said, that's horrible. Like that's really inappropriate. And I would actually encourage you not to tell anyone else that joke today." And the guy looked at him and said, "I've told that joke 15 times today, and you're one of two people who said that to me. And I'm telling the joke on purpose because I want to see how many people will just laugh, even though it's definitely not funny, versus how many people will say, 'Hey, come here for a minute. That's horrible.'" And I chuckled, and he told me the story because, he knew me. I always want to be the guy that's like, and I never want to do it in public. I never want to show anybody up, but I definitely would put my arm around a guy's shoulder or a gal and say, "Listen, that's awful. Like, that's not who we want to be today." And we all need people like that in our lives. So you can be on both sides of it. You want to be the person who will say those things to somebody in love. But I also think it's dangerous, and we can fall into this trap. You have to be willing to let someone love you enough to say something like that to you too.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously you talked a little bit earlier about the coaching side and how that's kind of your purpose here. I want to kind of get the other end of the spectrum here.
Mm.
What's the part of the business that you love the least?
Great question. So I've been on a journey for months now. COVID has been, you and I were talking about it before we got on. It's been in many ways one of the most unique challenges, regardless of where you fall on the spectrum of the political and health impact side of it. What we can, I think, all agree on is that's been one of the most unique opportunities to adapt in our lives because this has never happened before. So I chose to embrace that side of it, the adaptation side of it, and use the opportunity to say, okay, there's going to be a litany of things that I used to do a certain way that I can't do that way anymore. But maybe that's not a bad thing. How can I take this opportunity to slow down a little bit, to examine what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, and to Marie Kondo my business life? And I did. And so I wrote down a list of things that I was doing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that I hated doing. And I tried to figure out, is it something that I hate doing because I don't know I'm not doing it right, or I'm just never going to like it and I outsource it? So what I came up with that I knew I was never going to like and I was going to outsource. Um, I'll give you a couple of examples. I don't like to do integration work or a lot of deep tech work. It's funny because people who are very technical are laughing right now hearing that, like he's calling integrations deep tech work. Well, for me, it is creating a zap, if you will, between one program and another to automate a workflow. I hate that stuff. I love the effects of it. I love the end result, but I get so frustrated and irritated trying to figure out how to do it. Chatbots is another good example. As someone who has got a pretty good marketing brain, I'm very good at big picture and understanding the value of something like that and where it fits into an overall cohesive strategy. But I get immensely frustrated trying to actually create it. So for me, things like that are just sort of monotonous in the weeds work. I don't like. Graphic design is another example. I bought a subscription 6 months ago to Photoshop because I got into wild hair and I decided, all right, to heck with paying, graphic designers. I'm just going to figure this out myself. It lasted a week and I was begging for graphic designers to come back because it's just, you don't know how difficult it is if you're not really wired to do something until you try to do it. So I would say any of those monotonous tasks that are really best done by folks who have a little bit more of a technical bent to them, I have just learned that it's not worth my aggravation. And here's the flip side. And this is the part that a lot of people can relate to what I just said, but they may not be able to relate to this yet. You get to a point in your business where you know what you're great at. At least you should. You should get to a point where you know what are the 3 or 4 things that only you can do, at least to your satisfaction. For me, it's communication, it's top down strategic, and it's vision. Those are really the 3 things that I do really well. So you have to quantify what your hourly sort of rate should be for that based upon how much revenue you want to be making. And that's about the only time I think about revenue. I don't think about it in terms of like, I want a Lamborghini. I think about it in terms of, what is it that I want my kids to have for a lifestyle? Kind of what's our monthly burn rate? Where do we need to be, up and above that? And then you work backwards. And so for me, with my skill set, I figure out this is right about where I should be on an hourly. And I contrast that. So let's say you figure out that your hourly rate should be a couple $100. Probably should be higher if you're a business owner, but you got to start somewhere. Maybe start even lower. That's okay. But let's say it's $75 an hour, whatever it is. You really need to ask yourself if the task that you're doing at any given time, if you would pay somebody to do that for $75. If the answer is no, you shouldn't be doing it. So it's one of those deals where you really, I think, have to start figuring out what are the things that only you can do, and as quickly as you can move towards doing those things and eliminating all of the others. If you can't do that right away, most of us can't, then you create a force ranked list, in my opinion, of what's the first thing that I'm going to outsource that's going to give me the greatest amount of leverage in my business. And you do it and you stick to it.
I would probably even add to that, like as you're talking about the things that only you can do, I'd also add for your like quality of life, the things that you want to do too. Because just
Yes.
because you're good at something doesn't mean that you want it to be a part of your life, right?
Great point.
Yeah.
Great point. Yeah. How many folks, this is an interesting one. I've had a lot of clients because I've done quite a bit of work as a, you really need to change the term because, whether it's an executive coach, really it's just a successful person coach, an advisor. And I cannot tell you how many folks that I've talked to who are outwardly wildly successful, have everything that you would think that they want. And they would tell you, I have everything that I always thought I wanted. I can't tell you how many times I've heard a variation of that phrase said to me. And then the next thing that comes after it is, but I still feel unfulfilled or I'm unhappy or I hate my life. And what a lot of people don't think about is, let's say you get what you want. Let's say you get the dream that you think you want, the business that you wanted to own. You build up the, whatever it is that you were trying to build. And you think about what the actual day to day is running that business. And then ask yourself, are you really going to be happy doing that? Because if you don't think about that up front, and that's kind of where I'm at now, is I'm able to think multiple steps ahead in terms of what's it going to look like for me to be involved in whatever this project is or whatever this business is. How long am I going to have to do X, Y, and Z? And what's my exit strategy if it's going to be doing something that I don't necessarily want to do for a long time or a lifestyle that I don't want? So to your point, everything with me now starts with, I need to be a good father, a present father. I need to be a good and present husband. I need to be a good and present friend. And if I take on things that will prevent me from being any of those things, I don't need to do it.
Mhm. Yeah. There was a book that really helped me with basically exactly what you're talking about, a 12-week year, where
Mm,
like they come at it from the perspective of having your vision of what you want your life to be like. And because like I've heard so many stories of millionaires, at least on paper. Like Tom Bailey is one of my like favorite people that I
yeah.
love everything he talks about, and he's talked about how unfulfilled he was, even though he was a millionaire on paper.
Mm,
Like you really need to understand what it is that's going to lead to your fulfillment, and that's where obviously you've been able to figure that out. But I think for me that was a turning point, like the 12-week year, like actually understand what do I want my life to be like,
mm.
versus what am I doing where I'm looking at it and I gotta grind and I gotta do everything a certain way because that's what's expected. That's what I think the business world is supposed to be.
Yeah, corporate America, a lot of times folks who shift from corporate have a very difficult time. I did at first, and it took a long time to sort of shake off some of those preconceived and hardwired concepts. Because in corporate America, in many ways, there's a lot of status attached to how many hours you work. And there's even, buzzwords, "Oh, he's really putting in that time. He's really putting in the extra hours, blah, 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 blah." And it's not necessarily about end result. I mean, it's not that end result isn't important, but there's a disproportionate, in my opinion, status given to folks who put in long work weeks versus folks who are just competent and productive. And so when you come from that world for a long period of time and then you make the shift to entrepreneurship, you can falsely believe that you've had a great week if you just work 70 hours. The truth is that's a terrible week in my opinion. Like if I had a client that was telling me they were consistently working 70 hours, we would immediately need to start making some changes because we all know where that's going to lead, and it's not anywhere good. And chances are they have a lot of false beliefs that are leading them to the assumption that they have no choice but to do that. And you and I both know, and it's hard when you're in it, and I've been there, when you're in it and you have those blinders on, it's very difficult to stop for a moment and breathe and say, okay, wait a minute. Do I need to be doing all this? All you can think of is, I can't stop. I can't stop. I had to go. I had to go. Because if I stop, all these spinning plates are going to fall to the ground.
Mm.
If you can stop for a moment and listen to some people around you, whether you have to pay them or you are lucky enough to have folks in your life who you don't need to pay, who are very wise, and they can say, well, wait a minute, let's look at this together. Do you really need to be spinning all of these plates? And if they do need to be spinning, are you the one whose finger they need to be upon? And there's just so it really can become I think in some ways it's more dangerous for folks that start in corporate and move over, but also no offense to Gary Vee, who I love, and I think a lot of what he says is fantastic, but I do think a lot of people misinterpret him sometimes and his whole hustle culture. He's not talking about hustling for the rest of your life. It's not his point. His point is, yeah, when you start off, absolutely, you do have to bootstrap because you are the person wearing a lot of hats in your business, but that shouldn't be the status quo goal for you. The goal should be to get your business and your life to a point where you don't have to do all those things. And I think a lot of people, he gets a bit maligned, but I think if you really listen to a lot of his deeper talks, he makes the point, like, this isn't something you need to be doing forever. And you shouldn't, because you're going to burn out.
Yeah, that's very true. I'm kind of in that same camp where like I look at it more from the perspective of everyone looks at Gary Vee as like grind, 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 but um the way I look at it is specifically that even if you're going that route, eventually the reason behind it is going to fall away, and you have to find a reason to get through it. And just, well, I got to hustle after a couple days or however long it's going to be is not going to be enough to get you past it. You have to find something else that's going to get you through it.
Yeah, it's funny. I ask people this often about Gary Vee, and I have a very specific opinion about him. And I will ask people, what do you think Gary Vee's greatest strength is? And often people will say something business related. Well, he's, really good at seeing opportunity to find revenue. He finds hidden revenue. He's great at hustle. He's great at blah, blah, blah. It's always a business thing. I don't think it's any of those things. I think he has some skill in those areas, but I actually think if you watch him, Gary Vee's superpower is that he can listen to someone's story very quickly, and um, he can spot bullshit, and he can really quickly pattern interrupt and cut through to the heart of what's really going on. Because a lot of times when you hear these stories about people struggling in business or life or whatever, um, what they're saying is just a symptom. It's not the underlying issue. And he's incredible at very quickly being like, whoosh, whoosh, let me cut that, cut that, cut that. I'm going to poke right here because this is what's really going on. I actually think that's his superpower.
Well, very, very cool. I hadn't thought of it that way. I know I don't want to keep you too much longer here, but there's a couple of things I still wanted to ask you.
Sure.
So obviously you referenced coaching and kind of have you been doing that. So I wanted to ask you, like, there was a book I read it was from Gary Keller, the one thing, and they talk about the one thing.
Great book.
So what would you say right now is the most important thing that you're working on?
Right now, for me personally, I have a new project of my own coming up that, we have this evolution when we start getting into e-commerce and entrepreneurs, and we lift something heavier every time. It's not like training your body. Every time you try to get a little heavier, a little heavier, a little heavier. And I've had a lifelong challenge with gastrointestinal health. It started for me more than a decade ago. I got a stomach bug that was a result of me coming into contact with a patient when I was working as a medical device rep, and it just wrecked my stomach. And unfortunately, the medications that are used to treat that condition actually make it even worse because they just destroy everything in your stomach. It's almost like chemotherapy for your gut, biome, if you will. And ever since then, I've had these issues, and I've gone through hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of specialists and doctors and procedures and everything you can imagine to sort of figure this out. And the truth is, what you realize is they always end up coming to the same place, which is this word called idiopathic. Idiopathic in medicine simply means we don't know. It's a fancy word that sounds good on a diagnosis, but it's a way for them to say we have no idea. And from my own experience and getting a lot of, like, we've thrown everything we know to throw at it, we don't know. And in a lot of other patients who have had different but similar issues, they come to the same place. If you're what's called refractory, which is like they've thrown everything they can think of at you and you're still symptomatic and they don't know what to do because they're out of medications and they're out of procedures. It's predictable in the GI space, gastrointestinal GI. They will come to, well, maybe we should just give you antidepressants. And I can't tell you how many folks I know who got to that point and just were devastated, including me, because what it feels like is them saying, you're crazy. Like, you're just imagining this. And very clearly that the physical symptoms you have, you're not imagining. So what I decided to do was to use everything I've learned over the years, both working in the medical industry and also as a marketer and as a business owner in the e-commerce space, and to marry them into a market-driven solution for that problem. So I hired a team of developers. One of them is actually a physician who's also a developer. He's a brilliant guy, and told them, hey, here's what I want. Here's what I need it to do. Here's how I want it to help people. And we're creating gastrothrive.com, which very soon, in the coming weeks, we're going to release a beta version of it. And what it is a symptom tracking software that's very intelligent. And it allows you to track a number of symptoms, number of factors in your daily lifestyle, from diet to symptoms to water intake to supplement use, and it will intelligently try to coordinate spikes, and symptoms that you may have, flares, if you will, and kind of what environmental things are going on with you over time. And so I really wanted to create something that, one, would serve my needs, because I knew that if I built it for me, it would help a lot of other folks. And we're actually very optimistic. We've surprisingly gotten some interest from venture capital, which I've never done before, but we've gotten some interest from venture capital because that healthcare space is so rife for innovation. So that's my heaviest lift right now, is getting GastroThrive off the ground and getting it helping people in beta and sort of getting some initial early user experience with it to see how folks are using it and what benefit it's bringing to their life. And then I don't advertise coaching at all. It's been fascinating. My coaching practice is thriving and I don't even advertise. It's all word of mouth. I don't have a landing page. You can't go to my funnel. There's no upsells. It's just straight coaching. And you call me when you need me, but those are kind of the two things that I'm focused on right now.
Awesome. And I can't wait to see what, when that comes out too. Like definitely we'll talk about it here. But before I let you go, I wanted to ask you, I was guest on a friend of mine's podcast and he asked this question and I loved it. So I pretty much have stolen it and asked everybody this question.
It's yours now. If you use it 3 times, it's yours.
Yeah. So what's your definition of success?
Oh gosh. For me, that's really easy now. My definition of success is that you live a life where most days when you wake up, you're pretty happy with who you are and you feel like you make a positive impact on the people around you, your friends, your family, your community. And doesn't necessarily mean everybody likes you all the time, but if you ask 10 people about you, they would say, that guy's brought value to my life. That's really it. It's not about money for me anymore. Money's just look, I like to go out fishing and on a boat like the next guy, but it's just a scorecard thing. It's really more about true and deep impact.
That was awesome. So I wanted to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story, your expert insight. It was so good talking to you. I wanted to ask you, how can our listeners find more about what you're doing?
So you can find me at jbbrown.com. I believe my Facebook handle and Insta handle is your buddy JB. And shortly I'll have a website up that's realjbbrown.com, because I'm getting enough folks asking. So I'm going to put something up so folks can get in touch. But you can also keep in touch with what we're doing. GastroThrive.com should be available. But yeah, any of those areas, I'm pretty accessible on social media. And I mean, with a face like this, you're going to know right away if you've landed on my correct wall, as you will. So.
Awesome. And obviously we'll definitely have links for that as well. So thank you so much for coming on, JB. Hopefully I'll be able to have you again on in the future. And thank you to everyone for listening. I'll talk to you guys next time on Morning Marketing Machine.